The forbidden touch. The crystalline spires of Wintermere Palace gleamed like frozen tears against the twilight sky as Derrin Ashford guided his horse through the massive ice gates. He'd travelled 3 weeks from the warm southern valleys, his satchel heavy with cartography tools and his heart heavy with nerves. The royal court had commissioned him to restore and catalogue their ancient collection of territorial maps, an honour that could establish his career, if he didn't freeze to death first. The palace itself seemed carved from winter's heart. Walls of translucent ice refracted lamplight into dancing auroras, while servants in silver livery moved through corridors with practiced silence. Everything felt cold, beautiful, and utterly untouchable, much like the princess he'd heard whispered about in every tavern between here and home. Princess Seraphine Wintermere. The Ice Princess. The Frozen Heart. Merchants claimed she hadn't smiled in 7 years. Travelers swore her touch could frost wine in a goblet. Mothers warned their children that emotional coldness was a curse worse than any physical ailment. Derrin had dismissed such tales as superstition until his first glimpse of her during the evening's winter solstice ceremony. She stood upon a dais of carved ice, draped in gowns of silver and white that seemed woven from snowfall itself. Her hair fell like spun moonlight down her back, and her face possessed a perfection that felt almost cruel in its beauty. But it was her eyes that struck him most, pale blue and utterly empty, as though she watched the celebration from somewhere far beyond this world. No warmth, no joy, no flicker of life behind that porcelain mask. The great hall thronged with nobles celebrating the longest night. Derrin stood near the archival alcove, clutching a glass of spiced wine he was too nervous to drink, when the crowd suddenly surged forward to witness the princess's ceremonial blessing. Bodies pressed together, and he stumbled sideways just as Seraphine descended from her platform. His hand shot out to steady himself against a pillar, but instead his fingers brushed across her bare wrist where her glove had slipped down. The contact lasted barely a heartbeat, yet the entire hall seemed to freeze. Conversations died. Musicians faltered. 100 shocked faces turned toward them. Derrin snatched his hand back as though burned, his face draining of color. He'd been warned, touching the princess was forbidden, a law so ancient and absolute that violation meant immediate imprisonment or worse. "Forgive me, Your Highness," he stammered, dropping to one knee. "It was an accident. I—" But when he dared glance up, he found Seraphine staring at her wrist where he'd touched her, her expression no longer empty but shocked. Confused. Almost. Wondering. For just a moment, something flickered behind those icy eyes, a spark of warmth in the frozen wasteland. Then her mask returned. "Rise," she said, her voice carrying the authority of winter itself. "The cartographer is new to our customs. There will be no punishment for an innocent mistake." The crowd exhaled collectively. Conversations resumed. The musicians found their rhythm again. But as Derrin stood on trembling legs, he caught the princess watching him with an intensity that made his breath catch. Not angry. Not disgusted. Something else entirely, something almost hungry, as though his accidental touch had awakened something she'd forgotten existed. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of formal introductions and nervous apologies. Derrin retired to his assigned chambers in the palace's eastern wing, certain he'd be asked to leave by morning despite the princess's mercy. He was removing his formal coat when a soft knock came at his door. A veiled servant stood in the corridor, holding a sealed envelope of cream parchment. "For you, Master Ashford. To be read in private." She pressed it into his hands and vanished like mist before he could question her. With shaking fingers, Derrin broke the seal. The note contained only 2 lines in elegant script. "Come to the North Tower after moonrise. Tell no one. S." His heart hammered against his ribs as he held the paper to the lamplight, searching for some explanation. The princess wanted to see him? Alone? After what had happened? Outside his window, the moon began its slow ascent above the frozen mountains. Derrin stood at a crossroads between fear and curiosity, between safety and mystery. Everything in his practical mind screamed that this was dangerous, possibly a trap. But he remembered that flicker in her eyes, that moment when the Ice Princess had looked almost human. He threw on his cloak and slipped into the moonlit corridors, following the winding path toward the North Tower. Whatever Princess Seraphine wanted, he would face it. Because for just a heartbeat when their skin had touched, he'd felt something too, a warmth that shouldn't exist in a palace made of winter, and a connection he couldn't begin to explain. Unexpected refuge. Cade emerged from his bedroom 15 minutes later, dressed in clean maintenance coveralls and still toweling his damp hair. The three aliens stood clustered near his sister's workstation, maintaining a respectful distance from each other in what appeared to be acute embarrassment. They turned as he entered, and he got his first clear look at them. The tallest carried herself with natural authority despite her obvious discomfort. Crystalline patterns traced elegant lines along her temples and collarbones, catching the apartment's warm lighting. The one with silver markings that seemed to shimmer with emotion stood in the middle, her features delicate and expressive. The third, smallest of the group, had soft violet undertones to her skin and kept her gaze lowered, radiating quiet mortification. "So," Cade said, deciding humor might ease the tension. "That's one way to meet new people." The silver-marked one covered her face with both hands. "We are eternally mortified. I am Rissa, of the Lumerian Diplomatic Corps. This incident violates approximately 43 protocols of proper introduction." "Tyva," the tall one added, her crystalline patterns flickering with what might have been a blush. "Skyborne Navigation Specialist. Your door system responded to our diplomatic credentials. We assumed that my sister had programmed us clearance," the violet one finished softly. "I am Ivena, cultural scholar from the Whisperkin enclaves. The fault was our presumption." Cade waved away their apologies, tossing the towel onto a chair. "Nessa gives her colleagues access all the time. You couldn't have known I was here." He moved to the kitchen unit, activating the beverage synthesizer. "You mentioned something urgent." The three exchanged glances, and Tyva spoke first. "The Trilateral Summit collapsed 6 hours ago. A critical mistranslation during the territorial negotiations caused 3 ambassadors to believe they were being threatened with military action. What was meant as protective boundary was interpreted as aggressive encirclement. The talks disintegrated into accusations. We came seeking Nessa's expertise to reconstruct the linguistic context," Rissa added, her silver markings dimming with worry. "Without proper translation, 3 species may withdraw from the peace accords entirely." Cade handed them each a cup of synthesized tea, selecting varieties his sister had mentioned matched their cultural preferences. Their surprised expressions told him he'd chosen correctly. "Nessa taught me some basics over the years. I'm not a trained translator, but maybe I can help until she returns." Ivena's eyes met his for the first time, wide with cautious hope. "You would offer assistance? After we invaded your bathing ritual?" "Everyone makes mistakes," Cade said, settling into a chair and gesturing for them to sit. "Besides, preventing an interstellar incident seems more important than my bruised modesty." As they settled onto the curved sofa, maintaining careful space between themselves, Tyva studied him with open curiosity. "Your sister described you as relentlessly practical. I see her assessment was accurate." "She also said you were kind," Rissa added softly, her markings brightening slightly. "Though she failed to mention." She trailed off, but Cade caught the unfinished thought in her expression. He felt heat rise to his face and quickly changed the subject. "Tell me about the specific phrases that caused problems. Maybe we can find the contextual breakdown." As evening deepened outside the viewport, they spread diplomatic documents across the table. Cade found himself drawn into the intricate dance of language and meaning, but more than that, he noticed small things. How Rissa's markings shifted colors with her emotions, how Tyva's confidence softened when discussing her homeworld star paths, how Ivena's quiet observations carried unexpected depth. The awkward beginning was slowly transforming into something else, a comfortable collaboration that felt strangely natural despite the unusual circumstances. When their hands accidentally brushed while reaching for the same document, the moment lingered just slightly longer than necessary. Perhaps this diplomatic crisis had brought more than just trouble to his door. Secret meetings. The days that followed established a rhythm of careful deception. Publicly, Derin spent his time in the royal archives, meticulously restoring ancient maps while court officials occasionally checked his progress. He played his role perfectly, the humble scholar, grateful for the opportunity, keeping respectful distance from all royal matters. But after dusk, when the palace settled into its evening routines, he would slip through shadowed corridors to wherever Seraphine had indicated in her brief, coded notes. The forgotten library on the 3rd floor. The winter gardens where frost-covered roses grew in magical defiance of season. The observatory tower with its brass instruments measuring stars and possibilities. Their meetings began cautiously. Seraphine would take his hand, and they'd sit in silence while she experienced the flood of sensation the contact brought. Not just physical warmth but the return of emotional capacity, like blood flowing back into a sleeping limb. Sometimes she'd laugh at nothing, just to hear the sound. Sometimes she'd cry from the sheer relief of feeling anything at all. Darren would hold her hand and bear witness to her thawing, patient as spring. Gradually, silence gave way to conversation. Seraphine spoke of her childhood before the curse, the girl who'd loved horseback riding and terrible poetry, who'd snuck pastries from the kitchen and argued philosophy with her tutors. Darren shared stories of growing up in the southern valleys, of learning cartography from his grandfather, of dreams that had brought him north to this frozen palace and this impossible situation. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Seraphine asked one night in the library, lamplight playing across her features as they sat tucked into a window alcove, shoulders touching. Darren considered carefully. "I used to believe maps were truth, absolute, unchangeable records of the world. But the more I study them, the more I realize they're stories we tell ourselves about places. Two cartographers can stand on the same mountain and draw completely different versions of the same kingdom." He glanced at her. "I think people are like that too. The story others tell about you, the Ice Princess, is completely different from the truth I'm discovering." Her hand tightened on his. "And what truth are you discovering?" "That you're brave. That you've survived something that would have broken most people. That you haven't let cruelty turn you cruel." He met her eyes. "That the woman beneath the curse is extraordinary." Seraphine leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture that would have been impossible weeks ago when touch brought her no comfort. "The curse is weakening," she admitted quietly. "I can feel more each time we meet, not just during contact but after. Yesterday, I actually tasted my breakfast. This morning I felt annoyed when my lady-in-waiting chose the wrong dress. These tiny, ordinary emotions feel like miracles." "That's wonderful," Darren said, but heard the hesitation in his own voice. "You're worried," she observed, her newfound emotional awareness making her perceptive. "About what happens when the curse breaks completely." He was quiet for a long moment. "When you're free, you won't need me anymore. You'll return to being Crown Princess, and I'll return to being a traveling cartographer. This," he gestured between them, "whatever this is, it exists in a space outside normal life. Outside reality." Seraphine lifted her head, turning to face him fully. In the lamplight, her eyes held new depth, new warmth. "Do you think that's all this is? Gratitude? Necessity?" "I don't know," he admitted. "How can either of us know what's real when we're caught in such strange circumstances?" She took both his hands in hers, deliberate and certain. "Then let me tell you what I know. I know that I spend every hour between our meetings counting down until I can see you again. I know that when I hear your voice in the corridors, my heart, my previously frozen heart, beats faster. I know that I've shared things with you I've never shared with anyone, curse or no curse." Her thumbs traced circles on his palms. "I know that what I feel when I'm with you goes far beyond the simple return of sensation." Darren's breath caught. "Seraphine." "I'm falling in love with you," she said, each word deliberate and brave. "Maybe I started the night you first came to my tower. Maybe it happened gradually over all these stolen moments. But it's real, Darren. It's not the curse, and it's not gratitude. It's choice." The space between them crackled with tension. Darren raised one hand to her face, his fingers trembling as they traced the curve of her cheek. "I'm terrified," he confessed. "Not of you, but of losing you. Of what happens when reality intrudes on whatever magic we found here." "Then don't think about reality," Seraphine whispered, leaning into his touch. "Just be here, now, with me." When their lips met, it wasn't the desperate collision of two people afraid of losing each other, but something gentler, a question asked and answered, a bridge built between two hearts learning to trust. She tasted like winter wine and possibility, and when she made a small sound of pleasure against his mouth, Darren felt his entire world shift and resettle around this moment. They broke apart slowly, breathlessly, foreheads touching as the library settled into deeper silence around them. Seraphine's eyes gleamed with unshed tears, but this time they were tears of joy, of wonder, of emotions she'd thought lost forever. "I can feel everything," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "My heart is racing. My skin is warm. I feel alive, Darren. For the first time in 7 years, I feel completely alive." He pulled her close, and she melted against him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder as though designed to rest there. They stayed like that while the moon tracked across the sky beyond the windows, two people who'd found warmth in each other despite impossible odds, knowing their borrowed time was running out but choosing to live fully in whatever moments remained. In the shadows beyond the library door, neither of them noticed the figure that watched and then slipped silently away, carrying news that would soon threaten everything they'd built. Forbidden depths. The luminescence in the chamber had dimmed to a gentle twilight when Mirani finally stepped back, though her fingers remained intertwined with Davian's. Her expression had shifted, carrying a weight that made his stomach tighten with apprehension. "Come," she said quietly. "There is one more place I must show you before the sun's rise." She led him through a narrow passage that required them to walk single file, the walls so close that Davian's shoulders nearly brushed the crystalline stone. The air grew warmer, heavier with moisture, and he could hear the rush of water growing louder ahead. They emerged onto a natural platform overlooking a vast underground lake. Above them, an opening in the cavern ceiling revealed Thessera's night sky, 3 moons casting silver light across the water's surface, creating pathways of brilliance that seemed to lead to infinity. "This is the heart pool," Mirani said, her voice reverent. "The source of all the sacred waters on the Sara. Every stream, every pool, every drop of rain, it all begins here and returns here eventually." Davian stared at the expanse before them, feeling the significance of this place in his bones. "Why did you bring me here?" Mirani turned to face him, and in the moonlight, he could see tears tracking down her cheeks. "Because I need you to understand what we're facing. What this connection means, and what it costs." She moved to the edge of the platform where the water lapped gently at the stone. "Thousands of years ago, my ancestors made a covenant with the waters. In exchange for the gifts they provide, our long lives, our connection to the flowing, our ability to commune with every living thing on this planet, we promise to keep our bloodlines pure. To never bond with those who do not carry the resonance naturally." The words hit Davian like a physical blow. "But I do resonate. The pools proved that." "You resonate," Mirani agreed, "but you were not born to it. You are not Silhari." She wrapped her arms around herself as though suddenly cold. "There has never been an exception to this law. Those who break it face exile, cast out from the flowing, cut off from the waters that sustain us. It is a slow death, Davian. A withering of the spirit." "Then why show me all of this?" he asked, struggling to keep the pain from his voice. "Why let me feel this connection if it's impossible?" Mirani turned back to him, and the expression on her face was raw with longing and defiance. "Because the waters chose you. Because in all my years, I have never felt the flowing respond to anyone the way it responds to you." She stepped closer, her hands finding his chest. "Because when I look at you, I don't see an impossibility. I see inevitability." "Mirani." "I am being selfish," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "I know this. I am risking everything, my connection to my people, to the waters that have sustained my family for generations. But Davian, when you touched my hand in that first pool, I felt something I thought existed only in ancient songs. I felt complete." The confession hung between them like the water droplets in the grotto, suspended and shimmering with possibility. Davian raised his hands to cup her face, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I feel it too," he whispered. "I've traveled to 16 worlds, met hundreds of species, documented thousands of life forms. But I've never felt like I belonged anywhere, until I stumbled into that pool and saw you." Mirani's breath hitched, and then she was kissing him. Not the gentle, tentative touch he might have expected, but something fierce and desperate, as though she could pour all her longing and defiance into this single connection. Davian responded with equal intensity, his arms wrapping around her as they swayed together at the edge of the heart pool. The water behind them erupted in response, fountains of luminous liquid rising into the air in spirals that reached toward the open sky. Light filled the cavern, not harsh but jubilant, as though the waters themselves were celebrating what they had wrought. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Myrrine pressed her face against Davian's neck. "The flowing approves," she murmured against his skin. "Can you feel it?" He could. Through every point where their bodies touched, he felt that same warm tingling from before, but magnified 100-fold. It was as though the water in his cells was resonating with the water in hers, creating a harmony that transcended physical touch. "What do we do?" he asked, his lips brushing her temple. Myrrine pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "We make a choice. You can leave at dawn, return to your research station, and we can remember this as a beautiful impossibility. Or—" She paused, her expression vulnerable but determined. "Or we fight for this. We find a way to convince my people that what the waters have shown us matters more than ancient laws." "That could destroy your life," Davian said, even as every fiber of his being rebelled at the thought of walking away. "A life without you would already be destroyed," Myrrine replied simply. "The waters have shown me what we could be together. I cannot forget that. I cannot pretend I don't feel this." Davian looked past her to the heart pool, its surface now calm again but still glowing with inner light. He thought about his life before this moment, the loneliness he'd carried like a weight, the sense of searching for something he could never quite name. And he thought about the impossible rightness of standing here with this remarkable woman in his arms. "Then we fight," he said firmly. "I don't care if it's forbidden. I don't care if it's never been done before. If the waters brought us together, then there must be a reason." Relief and joy flooded Myrrine's features, and she kissed him again, softer this time but no less meaningful. When they parted, she took his hand and guided him down to the water's edge. "Kneel with me," she said, lowering herself to the stone platform. Davian knelt beside her, and together they reached forward to touch the heart pool. The moment their hands broke the surface, warmth enveloped them completely. Davian gasped as he felt not just Myrrine's emotions, but something vast and ancient, the consciousness of the waters themselves, accumulated wisdom from eons of flowing and connecting and sustaining life. And within that consciousness, he felt acceptance. Not judgment for breaking laws, but recognition of the bond that had formed between them. The waters had chosen this path, brought them together deliberately, and now they were confirming what Myrrine and Davian already knew in their hearts. They belonged to each other. When they withdrew their hands, both were trembling. Myrrine leaned against Davian's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close as the three moons traced their paths across the sky above. "We'll face whatever comes together," he promised, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Together," Myrrine echoed, her hand finding his and squeezing tight. They remained that way until the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, knowing that with the new day would come challenges and consequences they could barely imagine. But for now, they had each other and the blessing of the waters, and that was enough. The promise of tomorrow. Dawn arrived too quickly, painting the cavern in shades of rose and gold. Davian watched the light shift across Myrrine's face as she dozed against his shoulder, committing every detail to memory. The way her lashes cast shadows on her cheeks, the slight smile that curved her lips even in sleep, the way her hair had dried into soft waves that caught the morning light. She stirred as the warmth increased, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment, confusion crossed her features, then memory returned and her expression softened with a mixture of joy and apprehension. "Morning," Davian murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Morning," she replied, her voice still rough with sleep. She sat up slowly, stretching, then turned to look at the heart pool. Its glow had dimmed with the coming day, but it still pulsed with gentle light. "We should return to the original pool. I need to gather some things before we face my people." They made their way back through the passages they'd traversed the night before, but everything looked different in daylight. What had seemed magical and ethereal now appeared stark and real, a fitting metaphor for what they faced. When they reached the pool where they'd first met, Myrrine knelt beside it and began to whisper in a language Davian didn't understand. Her hands moved through the water in specific patterns, and slowly, something began to form in her palms. When she lifted them free, she held a pendant, a teardrop-shaped crystal filled with the pool's glowing water, suspended in a lattice of what looked like solidified light. "This is a memory keeper," she explained, standing and moving toward him. "It holds not just water from this sacred pool, but the resonance we created together. As long as you wear it, you'll carry a piece of the flowing with you. A piece of me." She fastened it around his neck, her fingers lingering at his nape. The pendant rested against his chest, warm and alive, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Mirani, I don't know when I'll be able to return," Davian said, voicing the fear that had been building since dawn. "My research contract here is only for another week, and then I'm supposed to return to the survey ship. It could be months before I can petition for another visit to the Sara." "I know," she said quietly. "But this is not an ending, Davian. It's a beginning. You'll return to your ship, and I'll speak with the Council of Flowing. I'll show them what the heart pool revealed, make them understand that the waters themselves chose this path." Her voice grew stronger, more determined. "My people respect the wisdom of the waters above all else. They cannot ignore what we've experienced. And if they do—" Mirani's jaw set with stubborn resolve. "Then I will make a different choice. One that my ancestors might not understand, but that my heart knows is right." She took both his hands in hers. "I have lived 247 of your years, Davian Reed. I have bathed in every sacred pool on the Sara. I have communed with the flowing in ways that would take days to describe. And in all that time, I have never felt what I felt with you in these past hours." The declaration made Davian's throat tight with emotion. He pulled her close, memorizing the feel of her in his arms, the way she fit against him as though they'd been designed for each other. "I'll find a way back," he promised fiercely. "I don't care what regulations I have to navigate or what strings I have to pull. I'll return to you." "I know you will," Mirani said against his chest. "The waters have shown me our future, Davian. It won't be easy, and the path is not yet clear, but we will find our way to each other. The flowing has never been wrong." They held each other as the suns climbed higher, unwilling to break the embrace but knowing they must. Finally, Mirani stepped back, her composure firmly back in place, though her eyes still shimmered with unshed tears. "Go," she said softly. "Return to your research station before your colleagues send search parties. I would prefer our story not begin with an intergalactic incident." Davian managed a small laugh despite the ache in his chest. "Practical as well as beautiful. How did I get so lucky?" "The waters chose well," Mirani replied with a slight smile. Then her expression turned serious once more. "Remember, Davian, the pendant will keep you connected to the flowing. If you need to reach me, hold it close and think of this pool. I'll feel your call across whatever distance separates us." "Does it work both ways?" he asked. She nodded. "Both ways. Always." They shared one final kiss, pouring everything they couldn't say into the touch, promises and hope and determination to bridge the impossible gap between their worlds. When they finally parted, the pool around them blazed with brilliant light, as though the waters themselves were bearing witness to their commitment. Davian turned to leave, then paused. "Mirani, what made you stay in that pool yesterday? You could have left before I arrived. The waters warned you someone was coming." Her smile turned mysterious, almost mischievous. "They told me someone was coming whose heart beat in rhythm with mine. What woman could resist meeting such a person?" She gestured toward the path leading out of the valley. "Now go, before I lose my courage and beg you to stay." With tremendous effort, Davian began walking. He looked back 3 times, and each time Mirani stood at the pool's edge, watching him with a mixture of love and determination on her face. The 3rd time, she raised her hand in a gesture he recognized from her water dance, the one that meant hope. He returned the gesture, feeling clumsy and inadequate, but her brilliant smile told him he'd done it right. The journey back to the research station took half the time the journey out had taken, though Davian barely noticed his surroundings. His mind was already planning how to request an extended research visa, how to build a case for cultural exchange programs with the Silhari, how to prove to Mirani's people that what he and she shared was worth protecting. The pendant against his chest pulsed warm and steady, a constant reminder of her presence. As he reached the edge of the station's boundary, he paused and wrapped his hand around the crystal. Immediately, he felt her, a wash of emotions that told him she'd returned home, that she was preparing to face her people, and beneath it all, a steady current of certainty that they would find their way back to each other. He sent back his own emotions, determination, hope, and the love that had bloomed so impossibly fast but felt as ancient and inevitable as the waters themselves. Her response came as a wave of warmth and joy, and then a single word that seemed to echo in his mind: together. Together, Davian whispered to the morning air, then turned toward the research station and the uncertain future ahead. Behind him, in a hidden valley filled with sacred pools, Mirani stood before the Council of Flowing and prepared to argue for a love that should have been impossible, but that the waters themselves had chosen to create. And in the heart pool deep beneath the surface, ancient waters pulsed with satisfaction, knowing that sometimes the best resonances were the ones no one expected, and that true connection transcended all barriers, even those written in laws thousands of years old. The waters had spoken. Now it was up to Davian and Mirani to make the universe listen. The end. Lessons from the pools of serendipity. Here are the meaningful lessons woven throughout the story. 1. Follow your curiosity. Davian's discovery began because he followed the glowing moss off his designated path. Sometimes the most profound experiences come when we're willing to explore beyond our planned routes and comfort zones. 2. Genuine connection transcends differences. Despite coming from different worlds and species, Davian and Mirani found deep compatibility. True connection isn't about similarity, it's about resonance at a deeper level. 3. Listen to your intuition. The waters in the story represent intuition and inner knowing. Both characters trusted what they felt rather than what logic dictated, and that trust led them to something meaningful. 4. Traditions should serve life, not restrict it. The Silhari's ancient laws were meant to protect their people, but when those laws prevented genuine connection blessed by their own sacred waters, it raised questions about whether rules should evolve with new understanding. 5. Love requires courage. Both characters risked significant consequences. Mirani faced potential exile, Davian faced an uncertain future. Real love often demands we step into the unknown despite our fears. 6. Respect sacred moments. When Davian accidentally intruded on Mirani's private ritual, he immediately tried to leave. Respecting boundaries and sacred spaces builds trust and shows character. 7. Vulnerability creates intimacy. Mirani shared her loneliness. Davian admitted feeling like he never belonged anywhere. Their willingness to be vulnerable accelerated their connection. 8. Nature often knows better than we do. The waters responded to their compatibility before either character consciously recognized it. Sometimes the universe signals truths we're not yet ready to acknowledge. 9. Joy and laughter strengthen bonds. Their clumsy dancing together and shared laughter were as important as their serious conversations. Playfulness and humor create lasting connection. 10. Choose your own path. Mirani had to decide between her people's approval and her own truth. The story suggests that living authentically sometimes means choosing a difficult path over an easy but unfulfilling one.